The moon hung low over Paris, casting a silver glow on the ancient city. Alexander Dupont adjusted his backpack, feeling the familiar thrill of anticipation. "This is it, Claire," he said, flashing a grin at his companion. Claire Martin, a historian with a practical mind and a skeptical outlook, rolled her eyes but couldn't hide a small smile. "You always drag me into the strangest places, Alexander." They stood at a nondescript entrance in the 14th arrondissement, an iron gate partially hidden by overgrown ivy. "You'll thank me later," Alexander said, pushing the gate open with a creak. The cold, damp air of the catacombs immediately hit them, carrying the scent of earth and decay. Claire shivered involuntarily. "I doubt that," she muttered, following him into the darkness. Flashlights in hand, they descended a spiral staircase, each step echoing ominously. The walls closed in, adorned with ancient graffiti and cryptic symbols. "These tunnels are older than Paris itself," Claire remarked, running her fingers over a faded inscription. "Used as a quarry, then ossuaries. Millions of bones rest here." "Perfect for an adventure," Alexander said, his voice tinged with excitement. They reached the bottom, the oppressive silence of the catacombs enveloping them. The narrow tunnel stretched ahead, barely wide enough for two people to walk side by side. "Ready?" Alexander asked, looking at Claire. She nodded, and they moved forward, their flashlights casting long, eerie shadows. The air grew colder as they delved deeper, the faint sound of dripping water their only companion. The walls, once lined with orderly stacks of bones, now gave way to chaotic piles, as if the dead themselves were restless. "This place gives me the creeps," Claire admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "That's part of the charm," Alexander replied, though even he couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. They turned a corner and entered a larger chamber, the ceiling lost in darkness. Alexander's flashlight beam caught something glinting on the far wall. "Look at that," he said, moving closer. A large, ornate mural covered the wall, depicting scenes of death and ritual. "I've never seen anything like this," Claire said, awe and dread mingling in her voice. "It's beautiful and terrifying." "Exactly why we're here," Alexander said, snapping a few photos. "This could be a significant find." As they examined the mural, a faint whisper echoed through the chamber. Both froze, their flashlights flickering. "Did you hear that?" Claire asked, her eyes wide. "Probably just the wind," Alexander said, though he didn't believe his own words. The whispering continued, growing louder and more distinct. They exchanged a nervous glance, the excitement of discovery now mixed with fear. "Let's keep moving," Alexander suggested, his voice steady but tense. They left the chamber, the whispers fading behind them. The tunnel ahead seemed darker, more foreboding. As they walked, the sense of being watched grew stronger. "Maybe we should turn back," Claire said, stopping to adjust her pack. "Not yet," Alexander replied, determined. "We've come this far." They pressed on, deeper into the catacombs, unaware of the ancient forces they had disturbed. The descent had only just begun, and the true horror of the catacombs was yet to reveal itself. The oppressive darkness of the catacombs grew thicker as Alexander and Claire ventured further into the labyrinth. Their flashlights seemed to barely pierce the inky blackness, the beams swallowed by the gloom. The air was heavy with moisture, and the faint echoes of their footsteps added to the eerie atmosphere. They continued through the narrow passageways, occasionally stopping to examine peculiar markings on the walls. "These symbols," Claire mused, "they're not just random graffiti. They seem deliberate." Alexander nodded, his curiosity piqued. "Maybe they're part of some ancient ritual. We need to document everything." As they moved deeper, the tunnel widened into another chamber. This one was even more unsettling than the first. The walls were covered with intricate carvings and symbols, many of which seemed to depict rituals involving the dead. A large stone slab in the center of the room appeared to be an altar, its surface stained with what looked like old blood. "Alexander, look at this," Claire called out, pointing to a particularly detailed carving. It depicted a figure in a hooded robe, surrounded by skeletal remains. The figure's hands were raised, as if commanding the dead to rise. "This is incredible," Alexander whispered, taking photos with his phone. "But why here? Why in the catacombs?" Before Claire could respond, A faint whisper echoed through the chamber, sending chills down their spines. It was the same whisper they had heard earlier, but now it was clearer, almost like a voice speaking a language neither of them understood. Claire's skepticism began to waver. "Do you think it's spirits?" she asked hesitantly. Alexander swallowed hard, his earlier bravado slipping. "I don't know, but we need to be careful." The whispering grew louder, more insistent. The air seemed to vibrate with a malevolent energy. They turned towards the tunnel they had just come from, but it was no longer the same. The once familiar passage now seemed to twist and turn, the walls shifting as if alive. "Alexander, something's wrong," Claire said, her voice shaking. "We need to get out of here." "I agree," he said, trying to keep calm. "Let's head back the way we came." They retraced their steps, but the catacombs seemed to conspire against them. The passages twisted and turned, leading them in circles. Every time they thought they recognized a landmark, it would disappear or change. Panic set in as they realized they were hopelessly lost. The whispering turned into faint voices, echoing from all directions. They could make out snippets of words, pleas for help and cries of anguish. The air grew colder, and the feeling of being watched became almost unbearable. "We need to find another way out," Alexander said, trying to mask his fear. "Let's keep moving." Claire nodded, gripping her flashlight tightly. They pressed on, deeper into the labyrinth, hoping to find a passage that would lead them to safety. As they walked, they stumbled upon a small alcove, partially hidden by a collapsed wall. "Look, there might be something in there," Claire said, pointing to the narrow opening. They squeezed through the gap, finding themselves in a small, dimly lit chamber. An old leather-bound journal lay on a makeshift altar, surrounded by melted candles. The air was thick with the smell of wax and decay. Alexander picked up the journal, dusting off the cover. "This could be important," he said, opening it carefully. The pages were filled with handwritten notes, sketches of symbols, and descriptions of rituals. "It's a priest's journal," Claire said, reading over his shoulder. He wrote about conducting rituals to appease the spirits of the plague victims. As they read further, the voices grew louder, almost as if reacting to their discovery. The journal contained instructions for a ritual meant to calm the restless spirits, but the final pages were torn out. "This is our way out," Alexander said, determination in his eyes. "We need to complete the ritual." "But we don't have all the instructions," Claire protested. "We'll figure it out," Alexander insisted. "It's our only chance." With renewed purpose, they gathered the materials listed in the journal and prepared to perform the ritual, hoping it would be enough to escape the horrors of the catacombs. As they gathered the materials for the ritual, the catacombs seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. Alexander and Claire worked quickly, driven by a mixture of fear and determination. The air grew colder, and the faint whispers turned into a cacophony of voices, filling the chamber with an oppressive presence. "Alexander, hurry," Claire urged, her hands trembling as she arranged the candles around the altar. The journal lay open beside them, its yellowed pages filled with the priest's desperate scrawls. "I'm going as fast as I can," Alexander replied, lighting the candles with shaking hands. The flickering flames cast eerie shadows on the walls, dancing in rhythm with the whispers. They placed the final ingredients on the altar: a handful of dried herbs, a vial of what looked like blood, and a small, intricately carved bone. Alexander began to read aloud from the journal, his voice steady despite the growing fear. "Spirits of the lost, we call upon you. Hear our plea and find peace. Release us from your grasp and return to your rest." As the words echoed through the chamber, the voices grew louder, almost drowning him out. Claire squeezed her eyes shut, whispering a silent prayer. The air became heavy, and the candles flickered violently, threatening to extinguish. Suddenly, a chilling wind swept through the chamber, extinguishing the candles and plunging them into darkness. The voices ceased, replaced by a deafening silence. Alexander and Claire froze, their breaths coming in short, panicked gasps. "Did it work?" Claire whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know," Alexander replied, straining to see in the pitch-black darkness. "But we need to keep moving." They fumbled for their flashlights, the beams cutting through the darkness and revealing the same unsettling chamber. The atmosphere, however, had changed. It felt heavier, more oppressive, as if the very walls were closing in on them. As they stepped out of the alcove, they heard a low, guttural growl echoing through the tunnels. "What was that?" Claire asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know, but we need to get out of here," Alexander said, gripping her hand and pulling her along. They moved quickly, the growl growing louder and more menacing with each step. The tunnel ahead seemed to stretch endlessly, the walls covered in the same cryptic symbols. Their footsteps echoed eerily, mingling with the growls that seemed to follow them. Just as they rounded a corner, they came face to face with a ghostly apparition. It was a man dressed in tattered robes, his eyes hollow and filled with an unearthly glow. His face twisted in anguish, and he reached out towards them, his fingers like claws. "Help me," he whispered, his voice echoing in their minds. Alexander and Claire recoiled, their hearts pounding. "We can't help you," Claire said, her voice cracking. "We don't know how." The spirit's expression turned to one of rage, and he lunged at them, passing through their bodies like a cold mist. They shuddered, the sensation leaving them breathless and disoriented. "We need to find another way," Alexander said, his voice urgent. "The ritual didn't work. We need more information." They pressed on, deeper into the catacombs, the growls and whispers growing more intense. Every turn seemed to lead them further into the labyrinth, and the sense of being watched became almost unbearable. As they stumbled upon another chamber, they found it filled with more relics and artifacts. In the center stood a statue of a hooded figure, its eyes seeming to follow them. The journal described this place as the heart of the catacombs, where the most powerful rituals were conducted. "We must be close," Alexander said, his voice a mix of hope and desperation. "There has to be something here that can help us." Claire searched the room, her flashlight beam revealing more symbols and carvings. "Look at this," she called out, pointing to an inscription on the wall. "It's in Latin. It says something about a final offering." Alexander moved closer, reading the inscription. "It says we need to make a personal sacrifice. Something precious to us." Claire's eyes widened. "What do we have that's precious enough to appease them?" Alexander thought for a moment, then reached into his backpack. He pulled out a small silver locket, a family heirloom passed down through generations. "This should do," he said, his voice heavy with reluctance. "Are you sure?" Claire asked, seeing the pain in his eyes. "It's the only way," Alexander replied, placing the locket on the altar. He recited the final lines of the ritual, his voice filled with resolve. "Spirits, we offer you this token. Accept it and grant us peace." The air grew colder still, and the growls and whispers intensified, reaching a deafening crescendo. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the noise stopped. The oppressive weight lifted, and the atmosphere lightened. "Did it work this time?" Claire asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander looked around, the silence almost unnerving. "I think it did," he said, his voice filled with cautious hope. "But we need to keep moving. We can't stay here." They left the chamber, the catacombs eerily silent around them. The sense of being watched had faded, but they knew they weren't out of danger yet. They had to find their way out before the spirits changed their minds. The silence that followed the ritual was almost as unnerving as the cacophony of voices that preceded it. Alexander and Claire moved cautiously through the narrow passages, their flashlights cutting through the oppressive darkness. The air felt lighter, but the sense of urgency remained. They came upon a passage that led to another chamber, this one larger and more foreboding than the others. The walls were covered in elaborate carvings, depicting scenes of death and rituals, much like the previous chambers but more intricate and sinister. "We're getting deeper into this," Claire murmured, her voice echoing slightly in the vast space. "Whatever's down here, it didn't want to be found." Alexander nodded, feeling the weight of their discovery. "We need to find more information." The journal mentioned a final offering, but there must be more to it. As they explored the chamber, they found another alcove, partially hidden behind a crumbling wall. Inside, they discovered an old, leather-bound journal, similar to the one they had found earlier, but in better condition. The air was thick with the smell of decay and wax. "Look at this," Alexander said, carefully picking up the journal. "It looks like another priest's journal." Claire peered over his shoulder as he opened the journal. The pages were filled with detailed sketches of symbols, rituals, and notes in Latin. "This might be what we need," she said, hope flickering in her eyes. As they read through the journal, they discovered more about the dark rituals performed in the catacombs. The priest had been trying to appease the spirits of plague victims who had been buried there, but his efforts had been incomplete. It says here that the final ritual requires not just a personal sacrifice, but also the involvement of both physical and spiritual elements, Claire translated. The ritual must be conducted at the heart of the catacombs, where the veil between the living and the dead is thinnest. Alexander's eyes widened. That must be the chamber with the statue we found earlier. We need to go back there. They retraced their steps, the sense of urgency growing with each passing moment. The catacombs seemed to respond to their determination, the passages becoming less confusing, almost guiding them back to the heart chamber. When they arrived, they found the statue of the hooded figure looming ominously in the center. The air was thick with an unspoken tension, as if the spirits were waiting for them to complete the ritual. "We need to follow the instructions precisely," Claire said, setting the journal down on the altar. "Every detail matters." They prepared the materials as outlined in the journal, arranging the candles and placing the locket back on the altar. Alexander began to read the ritual, his voice steady and clear. "Spirits of the lost, we call upon you. Accept our offering and find peace. Release us from your grasp and return to your rest." As he spoke, the air grew colder, and the room seemed to darken. The candles flickered violently, and the shadows on the walls seemed to move of their own accord. The oppressive presence returned, but this time it felt different, more focused, more deliberate. Claire joined in, her voice harmonizing with Alexander's. "We offer you this token, both physical and spiritual, as a sign of our respect and our plea for peace." The room shook slightly, and a low, guttural growl echoed through the chamber. The statue's eyes seemed to glow with an unearthly light, and the shadows around them writhed and twisted. "Spirits, hear us," Alexander continued, his voice rising above the noise. "We seek to make amends and bring you peace. Accept our offering and let us go." The growl intensified, and the room seemed to close in around them. But then, as if in response to their plea, the oppressive weight lifted. The candle's flames steadied, and the shadows retreated. "It worked," Claire whispered, her voice filled with awe and relief. Alexander nodded, his heart pounding. "We need to leave now, before anything changes." They quickly gathered their things and made their way out of the chamber. The catacombs, which had seemed so hostile and confusing before, now felt more navigable. They followed the passages back, guided by a newfound sense of purpose. As they approached the entrance, the air grew warmer, and the oppressive feeling dissipated completely. They climbed the spiral staircase, each step bringing them closer to freedom. When they finally emerged into the cool night air, they both breathed a sigh of relief. The moon hung low over Paris, casting a silver glow on the city, a stark contrast to the darkness they had left behind. "We did it," Claire said, her voice trembling with a mix of exhaustion and triumph. "We actually did it." Alexander nodded, a sense of accomplishment washing over him. "We made it out, and we brought peace to the spirits." As they walked away from the entrance, they knew that their experience in the catacombs would stay with them forever. The horrors they had faced and the secrets they had uncovered had changed them, binding them together in a way few would ever understand. As they emerged from the catacombs, the night air brought a temporary sense of relief. However, both Alexander and Claire knew that their ordeal was far from over. The ritual they had performed might have calmed the spirits temporarily, but the incomplete journal hinted at further steps needed to achieve lasting peace. Back at Alexander's apartment, they pored over the two journals, hoping to find a clue they might have missed. The eerie silence of the catacombs still echoed in their minds, making every shadow in the room seem menacing. "We must have missed something," Claire said, her frustration evident. "The journals don't give us all the answers, but there must be a way to complete the ritual properly." Alexander frowned, flipping through the pages. The priest mentioned a final offering, both physical and spiritual, but what exactly does that entail? The spirits reacted, but it wasn't enough. As they debated, the room grew colder, and the candles they had lit flickered violently. A chill ran down their spines as they realized the spirits were not yet appeased. The oppressive feeling from the catacombs seemed to seep into the apartment, reminding them that their task was incomplete. "We need to go back," Alexander said with determination. "We need to perform the ritual again, but this time we need to get it right." Claire nodded, though her face was pale. "But how? We don't have all the instructions. Maybe we need to involve something more personal," Alexander suggested. "Something that binds us to the catacombs in a way that the spirits can accept." After a restless night, they returned to the catacombs the next day, armed with a new plan. They retraced their steps to the heart chamber, their footsteps echoing eerily in the silent tunnels. The oppressive atmosphere was back, the weight of countless restless spirits bearing down on them. As they entered the chamber, the statue's eyes seemed to follow them, glowing with a malevolent light. The candles they had left behind were melted stubs, and the altar stood empty. "Let's set everything up again," Alexander said, trying to keep his voice steady. "This time, we'll offer something more significant." Claire nodded, her hands shaking as she arranged the candles and placed the locket back on the altar. They had decided to offer their own blood, hoping it would be enough to appease the spirits. With a deep breath, Alexander cut his palm, letting the blood drip onto the altar. Claire did the same, wincing as the blood mingled with the dried herbs and bone. "Spirits of the lost, we call upon you," Alexander began, his voice echoing in the chamber. "Hear our plea and find peace. Accept this offering and release us from your grasp." The air grew colder, and the shadows on the walls seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. The oppressive weight grew heavier, and the growls and whispers returned, louder and more menacing than before. "Spirits, we offer you this token," Claire added, her voice trembling, "both physical and spiritual, as a sign of our respect and our plea for peace." The room shook, and the statue's eyes glowed brighter. The candles flickered violently, and the shadows writhed as if alive. The oppressive presence grew almost unbearable, pressing down on them with a tangible force. "Spirits, hear us," Alexander shouted, desperation in his voice. "We seek to make amends and bring you peace. Accept our offering and let us go." The growl reached a deafening crescendo, and the room seemed to close in around them. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the noise stopped. The oppressive weight lifted slightly, but not completely. "Did it work?" Claire asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander looked around, his heart pounding. "I don't know. It feels different, but not enough." Just as they thought they might have succeeded, the statue's eyes flared with an intense light, and the shadows surged towards them. The air grew frigid, and a low, guttural growl filled the chamber, more menacing than ever. "We need to leave," Alexander said urgently, grabbing Claire's hand. "Now." They ran through the tunnels, the shadows chasing them with relentless fury. The passages twisted and turned, leading them in circles as the oppressive presence grew stronger. Every step seemed to take them deeper into the labyrinth, and the sense of being watched became almost unbearable. "We're not going to make it," Claire gasped, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts. "The spirits, they're not letting us go." "We have to keep trying," Alexander insisted, his mind racing for a solution. "There has to be a way out." As they stumbled upon another chamber, they found it filled with relics and artifacts, similar to the previous chambers but more sinister. The shadows around them seemed to close in, and the air grew colder with every passing second. In their desperation, they noticed an ancient, ornate mirror on the far wall. The journal had mentioned something about a mirror being a gateway. "Maybe the mirror," Alexander said, hope flickering in his eyes. "It could be our way out." They rushed to the mirror, the shadows nipping at their heels. As they reached it, the surface of the mirror began to ripple, as if responding to their presence. "Spirits, we seek your mercy," Claire said, her voice filled with desperation. "Let us leave in peace." The mirror's surface continued to ripple, and for a moment, it seemed as though it might work. But then the shadows surged forward, and the growl intensified, echoing through the chamber. "We have to go now," Alexander shouted, pulling Claire towards the mirror. As they stepped through the rippling surface, a cold, biting wind enveloped them, and the world around them shifted. They emerged on the other side, gasping for breath. The oppressive weight was gone, and they found themselves in an ancient, abandoned part of the catacombs, far from where they had started. "We made it," Claire whispered, tears of relief streaming down her face. "We actually made it." Alexander nodded, his own relief palpable. "But we still haven't fully appeased the spirits. We need to find the final piece of the puzzle." As they looked around the new chamber, they realized that their journey was far from over. The spirits had given them a temporary reprieve, but the true path to peace lay ahead, waiting to be discovered. The new chamber was filled with an unsettling silence, the kind that weighed heavily on the soul. Alexander and Claire knew they had to keep moving, but the oppressive atmosphere made every step feel like a struggle. The walls were lined with more ancient symbols and carvings, but these were different, more menacing and intricate. As they explored the chamber, they came across an old, iron-bound door partially hidden behind a pile of rubble. The door's surface was covered in scratches and symbols that seemed to pulse with a faint, eerie glow. Alexander and Claire exchanged a wary glance before pushing the door open. Beyond the door was a narrow passage that led to a vast, dimly lit chamber. In the center stood a grand, ornate altar, and behind it, a towering statue of a hooded figure loomed ominously. The figure's eyes glowed with an unearthly light, and the air was thick with the scent of incense and decay. "This must be the heart of the catacombs," Claire whispered, her voice filled with awe and dread, "where the veil between the living and the dead is thinnest." As they stepped into the chamber, the oppressive weight they had felt before returned with a vengeance. The air grew colder, and the shadows around them seemed to move of their own accord. A low, guttural growl echoed through the chamber, sending chills down their spines. Suddenly, the shadows coalesced into a tall, menacing figure. A man dressed in tattered robes, his eyes hollow and glowing with an unearthly light. "The Keeper," Claire breathed, recognizing the figure from the journal's descriptions. The Keeper's voice was a chilling whisper, filled with ancient power and malice. "You dare to disturb this sacred place? You seek to appease the spirits, but you do not understand the true cost." Alexander stepped forward, his resolve unwavering. "We seek to bring peace to the spirits trapped here. Tell us what we must do to complete the ritual." The Keeper's eyes narrowed, and he seemed to study them for a moment. "The ritual requires more than a mere offering. It demands a sacrifice of both body and soul. Only then will the spirits be appeased." Claire's eyes widened in horror. "What kind of sacrifice?" The Keeper raised a skeletal hand, and the shadows around them seemed to pulse with anticipation. "One of you must willingly offer your soul to the spirits. Only through this ultimate act of selflessness can the ritual be completed." The room fell silent, the weight of the Keeper's words hanging heavily in the air. Alexander and Claire exchanged a tense glance, the enormity of the decision before them sinking in. "I'll do it," Alexander said finally, his voice steady but filled with resolve. "I'll offer my soul to the spirits." "No, Alexander," Claire protested, her eyes filling with tears. "There has to be another way." "This is the only way," Alexander insisted, his eyes locked on the Keeper. "If it means bringing peace to the spirits and saving us, then it's a sacrifice I'm willing to make." The Keeper nodded approvingly. "Very well. Step forward and prepare yourself." Alexander approached the altar, his heart pounding in his chest. As he placed his hands on the cold stone, the shadows around him seemed to writhe and twist, as if eager to claim their prize. "Spirits of the lost," Alexander began, his voice trembling but resolute. "I offer my soul to you. Accept this sacrifice and find peace." The room shook violently, and the air grew colder still. The shadows surged forward, enveloping Alexander in a swirling vortex of darkness. Claire watched in horror, unable to do anything but pray for her friend's safety. The Keeper raised his hands, chanting in a language neither of them understood. The shadows pulsed with an unearthly energy, and Alexander felt a searing pain in his chest. He gasped, but kept his focus on the ritual. As the pain intensified, Alexander's vision blurred, and he felt his consciousness slipping away. But just as he was about to succumb to the darkness, a sudden burst of light filled the chamber. The shadows recoiled, and the oppressive weight lifted. Alexander collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. Claire rushed to his side, her eyes wide with relief. "You did it," she whispered, helping him to his feet. "You completed the ritual." The keeper's form began to dissolve, his voice a fading whisper. "The spirits are appeased. You have brought them peace. Go now and leave this place." As the last remnants of the keeper vanished, the chamber grew silent. The oppressive weight was gone, replaced by a sense of calm and tranquility. Alexander and Claire made their way out of the chamber, their steps lighter than before. The passages that had once seemed so confusing now felt navigable, as if the catacombs themselves were guiding them to safety. When they finally emerged into the open air, the first light of dawn was breaking over Paris. The city, which had once seemed so distant, now felt welcoming and safe. "We made it," Claire said, her voice filled with awe. "We actually made it." Alexander nodded, a sense of accomplishment and relief washing over him. "We brought peace to the spirits, and we made it out alive." As they walked away from the entrance, they knew that their experience in the catacombs would stay with them forever. The horrors they had faced and the secrets they had uncovered had changed them, binding them together in a way few would ever understand. The dawn light that greeted Alexander and Claire as they emerged from the catacombs brought a temporary sense of peace, but they knew their journey wasn't over. The spirits had been appeased, but only partially. They needed to complete the final ritual to ensure lasting peace. "We need to go back," Alexander said, his voice resolute despite the exhaustion in his eyes. "There's something we're still missing. The journals mentioned a final offering. We need to figure out what that is." Claire nodded, her determination matching his. "Let's go through the journals again. There must be a clue we overlooked." Back at Alexander's apartment, they carefully reviewed the journals, cross-referencing every detail. Hours passed, and the sun climbed higher in the sky, but they persisted. Finally, Claire's eyes lit up as she found a passage they had previously skimmed over. "Here," she said, pointing to the text. "The final offering isn't just a physical or spiritual sacrifice. It requires a personal confession of guilt and apology, an acknowledgement of the past wrongs committed here." Alexander read the passage, his heart sinking. "We need to confess and apologize to the spirits. That's the final piece." With a renewed sense of purpose, they gathered their supplies and headed back to the catacombs. The air grew colder as they descended, but the oppressive feeling was less intense, as if the spirits were waiting for their final act. When they reached the heart chamber, the statue of the hooded figure stood as imposing as ever. They arranged the candles around the altar and placed the locket back in the center. The air was thick with anticipation. "Let's do this," Alexander said, taking a deep breath. "Spirits of the lost, we are here to make amends. We offer our sincerest apologies for the wrongs committed here. I confess my recklessness and arrogance in disturbing your rest." Claire joined in, her voice trembling but sincere. "I confess my skepticism and fear, and I apologize for not understanding your pain. We seek to bring you peace and closure." The air grew colder, and the candles flickered violently. The shadows around them seemed to pulse with energy. Alexander and Claire continued their confessions, baring their souls and seeking forgiveness. As they spoke, the oppressive weight lifted slightly, and the atmosphere shifted. The shadows began to retreat, and the air grew warmer. The statue's eyes glowed softly, as if acknowledging their sincerity. "Spirits, we offer you this token of our respect and our plea for peace," Alexander said, placing the locket on the altar. "Accept our apologies and find rest." The room shook slightly, and a soft, almost soothing whisper filled the chamber. The oppressive weight lifted completely, replaced by a sense of calm and tranquility. "It worked," Claire whispered, tears of relief streaming down her face. "We did it." Alexander nodded, a sense of accomplishment and peace washing over him. "We brought them peace. It's over." As they made their way out of the chamber, the passages that had once seemed so confusing now felt clear and welcoming. The catacombs, which had been a place of terror and despair, now felt like a place of rest and tranquility. When they emerged into the open air, the city of Paris seemed to welcome them with open arms. The horrors they had faced and the secrets they had uncovered had changed them, but they had emerged stronger and more united. "We did it," Claire said, her voice filled with awe. "We actually did it." Alexander smiled, a sense of accomplishment and peace filling his heart. "We brought peace to the spirits, and we made it out alive." As they walked away from the entrance, they knew that their experience in the catacombs would stay with them forever. The horrors they had faced and the secrets they had uncovered had changed them, binding them together in a way few would ever understand. The early morning sun cast a golden hue over Paris as Alexander and Claire emerged from the catacombs for the final time. The weight of their ordeal lingered, but the oppressive darkness that had haunted their every step had finally lifted. The city, vibrant and bustling, felt like a stark contrast to the silent, eerie tunnels they had just left behind. "Do you think it's really over?" Claire asked, her voice tinged with a mix of exhaustion and hope. Alexander nodded slowly, his eyes reflecting the relief and fatigue of their journey. "We did everything the journals instructed. We made our confessions, offered our apologies, and performed the rituals. The spirits should be at peace now." They walked through the quiet streets, the early morning commuters oblivious to the life-and-death struggle that had played out beneath their feet. As they reached Alexander's apartment, they both sank into chairs, the adrenaline finally giving way to sheer exhaustion. "We should document everything," Claire said after a moment, her voice thoughtful. "Not just for ourselves, but so that others know what happened here and don't make the same mistakes." Alexander agreed, retrieving a notebook. They began to write down every detail of their journey, from the initial descent into the catacombs to the final ritual that had brought peace to the restless spirits. The act of writing felt therapeutic, a way to process the trauma they had endured. Hours later, as they finished their documentation, a sense of closure settled over them. The horrors they had faced were now confined to the pages of the notebook, a testament to their bravery and determination. "Do you think anyone will believe us?" Claire asked, her tone both curious and skeptical. "Maybe not," Alexander admitted, "but it's important that we tell the story anyway, even if it just serves as a warning to others." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of their experience still fresh, but slowly beginning to fade. The bond they had forged in the catacombs was unbreakable, a shared understanding that went beyond words. "I think we should take a break," Claire said finally, a small smile playing on her lips. "Maybe go somewhere quiet and peaceful, somewhere with sunlight and fresh air." Alexander chuckled, nodding in agreement. "That sounds like a perfect plan. We've earned it." As they made plans for a much-needed vacation, the oppressive memories of the catacombs began to recede. They knew they would never forget what they had experienced, but they also knew they had emerged stronger, their friendship deepened by the trials they had faced together. Before leaving for their trip, they visited the entrance to the catacombs one last time. They placed flowers near the gate, a final gesture of respect for the spirits who had found peace. "Rest in peace," Claire whispered, her eyes closed in silent prayer. Alexander stood beside her, feeling a sense of finality. "And thank you for letting us go." With that, they turned away from the catacombs, leaving the darkness behind. The sun was shining brightly, and the world felt full of possibilities. As they walked through the streets of Paris, they knew that they had not only survived, but had also brought a measure of peace to the past. Their story, though filled with terror and hardship, was ultimately one of triumph and reconciliation. And as they embarked on their new journey, they carried with them the lessons learned from the depths of the catacombs, a reminder of the power of courage, friendship, and the enduring human spirit. The days following their ordeal in the catacombs were a blur of sunlight, laughter, and the comforting sounds of everyday life. Alexander and Claire took a much-needed vacation to the French countryside, where the serene landscapes and fresh air provided a stark contrast to the oppressive atmosphere of the catacombs. They spent their days exploring quaint villages, enjoying local cuisine, and reflecting on their harrowing adventure. The horrors they had faced felt like a distant memory, but the lessons they had learned remained fresh in their minds. One evening, as they sat on the terrace of their charming bed and breakfast, watching the sun set over rolling hills, Claire turned to Alexander. "Do you ever think about what else might be hidden beneath our feet? Other secrets waiting to be uncovered?" Alexander smiled, a twinkle of curiosity in his eyes. "Every day. The world is full of mysteries, Claire. And while the catacombs were terrifying, They also reminded me of why I love exploring the unknown. Claire nodded thoughtfully. Do you think we'll ever go on another adventure like that? Perhaps, Alexander said, his voice tinged with excitement. But hopefully, the next one won't be quite so dangerous. Their vacation came to an end, and they returned to Paris, feeling rejuvenated and ready to face the world. They resumed their daily lives, but the bond forged in the catacombs remained strong. One day, while sorting through the photos and notes from their journey, Alexander came across a particularly intriguing passage in one of the journals. It hinted at another hidden location, this time beneath the streets of London. "Claire!" he called out, his voice filled with excitement. "You need to see this." Claire joined him, peering over his shoulder at the journal. "What is it?" "This passage," Alexander said, pointing to the text. "It suggests there might be another set of catacombs beneath London, and they could be even older than the ones in Paris." Claire's eyes widened. "Are you suggesting we go to London and explore them?" Alexander grinned. "Why not? We survived the catacombs of Paris. Who knows what we might find beneath London?" Claire hesitated for a moment, then smiled. "All right, I'm in. But let's promise to be more prepared this time." "Agreed," Alexander said, his eyes sparkling with anticipation. "Let's uncover another mystery." As they made plans for their next adventure, the sense of excitement and curiosity that had brought them together in the first place was reignited. They knew that their experiences in the Parisian catacombs had changed them, making them more resilient and determined. And so, with a renewed sense of purpose and a deeper understanding of the past, Alexander and Claire set their sights on London. The world was full of secrets, and they were ready to uncover them together. Their story was far from over. It was merely the beginning of a new chapter, filled with endless possibilities and the promise of new discoveries. As they looked forward to their next adventure, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them side by side. As they packed their bags for London, a final entry in the priest's journal caught Alexander's eye. It spoke of a forgotten relic, hidden in the depths of the London catacombs, a relic said to possess unimaginable power. "We need to find this," Alexander said, his voice filled with determination. Claire nodded, her eyes shining with excitement. "Let's do it. Let's uncover the secrets of the London catacombs." With that, they embarked on a new journey, ready to face whatever mysteries and dangers awaited them. The catacombs of Paris had tested their courage and resilience, but the catacombs of London promised to be an even greater challenge. And so their story continued, filled with adventure, discovery, and the unbreakable bond of friendship. For Alexander and Claire, the world was a place of endless wonder, and they were determined to explore every hidden corner, no matter the cost. If you enjoyed unraveling this, you're in for another spine-tingling tale. Click the video on your screen to discover more eerie stories from the Phantom Story Society, where history's darkest secrets come to life. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Until next time, stay curious and beware of the shadows.